Welcome to A History Chapter, where today we embark on a riveting journey back to June 18, 1815, to revisit the Battle of Waterloo, the final stand of Napoleon. This episode promises to immerse you in one of history's most decisive moments, a battle that not only marked the culmination of one of the most remarkable military careers ever known, but also reshaped the geopolitical landscape of 19th century Europe. The background of the Napoleonic Wars, culminating in the Battle of Waterloo, is a complex tapestry of political, social, and military developments that reshaped Europe over the course of the late 18th and early 19th centuries. Here's a broader overview. The roots of the conflict trace back to the French Revolution of 1789, which upended the traditional monarchical and aristocratic order in France. Amidst the tumult, Napoleon Bonaparte, an ambitious and skilled military leader, rose to prominence. By 1799, he had seized power in France in a coup d'état, eventually declaring himself emperor in 1804. His reforms modernized France, but also ignited conflicts with various European powers, leading to a series of coalitional wars. These wars were characterized by Napoleon's rapid expansion of the French Empire across Europe, challenging the established order. He implemented revolutionary laws and reforms in territories he conquered, spreading ideals of the French Revolution, but also provoking nationalistic resistance. His continental system, aimed at crippling Britain's economy through a blockade, further strained relations with other European powers. In 1808, Napoleon's attempt to enforce the continental system in Portugal led to the Peninsular War in Spain and Portugal, drawing in British forces and leading to a prolonged and draining conflict. In 1812, Napoleon's disastrous invasion of Russia marked a turning point, decimating his Grande Armée and emboldening his enemies. Following the Russian campaign, a sixth coalition of European powers, including Britain, Prussia, Russia, Sweden, Austria, and others, was formed. They decisively defeated Napoleon in the Battle of Leipzig in 1813, leading to his first abdication and exile to Elba in 1814. Napoleon's escape from Elba in 1815 and return to power in France for a period known as the 100 Days prompted the Seventh Coalition to form against him. This coalition aimed to permanently end Napoleon's influence in Europe. Concurrently, the Congress of Vienna, 1814-1815, was in session, with European leaders negotiating the future of the continent. They sought to restore the pre-Napoleonic order and establish a balance of power that would ensure lasting peace. Napoleon's return interrupted these discussions, but after his defeat at Waterloo, the Congress resumed its work, redrawing the map of Europe and setting the stage for the 19th century. The Battle of Waterloo thus represents not just the climax of a single conflict, but the culmination of over 2 decades of revolutionary upheaval and warfare that fundamentally altered the political and social landscape of Europe. After his abdication in April 1814, on terms of the Treaty of Fontainebleau, he was exiled to the island of Elba near the Italy coast. He was granted sovereignty over the island, allowing him a personal guard and a comfortable, albeit constrained, life. However, Napoleon was closely monitored by the Allies and became increasingly aware that his status and safety were precarious. Moreover, he was informed of the unrest and dissatisfaction with the Bourbon monarchy, which had been restored in France under King Louis XVI. Several factors motivated Napoleon to leave Elba. Political unrest in France. Reports reached him of discontent with the Bourbon restoration, which was seen as undoing the achievements of the Revolution and the Napoleonic reforms. Personal ambition. Napoleon's ambition and belief in his destiny to rule France and shape Europe had not diminished. Allied powers discussions. He learned of discussions among the Allied powers to possibly remove him from Elba, which likely would have meant a more remote and secure confinement. Following his daring escape from the island of Elba in February 1815, Napoleon Bonaparte embarked on a remarkable journey back to power, culminating in the fateful Battle of Waterloo. This period, known as the 100 Days, saw Napoleon swiftly and decisively reassert his control over France and challenge the restored Bourbon monarchy. Upon setting foot on French soil on March 1, 1815, Napoleon was initially met with orders for his arrest. However, his charisma and reputation quickly turned potential adversaries into fervent supporters. As he traveled north from Cannes towards Paris, the momentum of his return, often likened to the spread of wildfire, saw town after town and regiment after regiment declaring their allegiance to him. The march through France became a triumphant procession, with Napoleon astutely avoiding confrontation with larger royalist forces, instead appealing directly to the soldiers' loyalty and the populace's nostalgia for the glory days of his empire. Napoleon's return sent shockwaves through Paris. King Louis XVI, realizing the untenability of his position as the loyalty of the army and the people shifted, fled the capital. On March 20th, Napoleon entered Paris, reclaiming leadership without firing a single shot, an astounding testament to his enduring influence and the deep divisions within France regarding the Bourbon restoration. In the wake of his return, Napoleon moved swiftly to consolidate his power. He issued conciliatory proclamations, seeking to reassure the powers of Europe that he desired peace and the preservation of the territorial status quo. Despite these overtures, the Allied powers, gathering at the Congress of Vienna, declared him an outlaw, and a new coalition was quickly formed to remove him from power once again. Understanding that time was not on his side, Napoleon began reorganizing the French army, drawing on both veterans of his previous campaigns and new recruits inspired by his legacy. He sought to strike quickly and decisively, hoping to disrupt the formation and coordination of the Allied forces against him. By June, he had assembled an army and decided to invade Belgium, where British and Prussian forces were gathering but not yet fully united. Napoleon's plan was bold and characteristically aggressive. He aimed to divide and conquer, seeking to separate the British forces under Wellington from the Prussians led by Blücher and defeat them in detail before other allies could enter the fray. The campaign began with initial successes, including the engagement at Ligny, where Napoleon's forces achieved a tactical victory against the Prussians, and at Quatre Bras, where the British and their allies held their ground. However, the campaign quickly became a race against time, with Prussian resilience and the strategic acumen of Wellington frustrating Napoleon's efforts to isolate and destroy each army in turn. Despite these challenges, Napoleon pressed on, leading his army to the plains of Waterloo. On June 18, 1815, he faced a well-prepared Anglo-Allied army under Wellington's command, with Prussian forces moving to support them. Napoleon's actions from his escape from Elba to his final gamble at Waterloo were driven by a mix of strategic brilliance and the desperation of a leader seeking to reclaim his former glory. They highlight not only his military genius, but also the volatile political and social landscape of post-revolutionary France, setting the stage for one of history's most studied battles. Napoleon's forces were arrayed on the southern end of the battlefield, positioned to attack the Allied forces arrayed along a ridge to the north. Napoleon aimed to split the Allied forces and defeat them separately. He hoped to prevent the British and Prussian armies from uniting, planning to defeat English army before turning to face Blücher's Prussians. A swift victory over these forces would disrupt the coalition arrayed against him and potentially allow him to negotiate a favorable peace. French army, powered by very experienced veterans and full of vigor, new recruits numbered in total around 7,000 troops and more than 250 artillery guns. This force included the elite Imperial Guard, a highly trained and loyal unit that served as Napoleon's final reserve and personal guard. On the opposite side stood the Anglo-Allied army that was positioned on a ridge north of the French positions. This ridge offered a defensive advantage, allowing Wellington to place his troops behind the crest for protection against artillery fire. Key positions included the farmhouse of La Haye-Sainte, which controlled the center of the battlefield, and the chateau of Hougomont on the Allied right flank. Commanded by the Duke of Wellington, Arthur Wellesley Anglo-Allied Army comprised about 68,000 troops, including 30,000 British, Dutch, Belgian, and German soldiers, and only 150 artillery guns. This diverse force was less experienced than the French, particularly in the case of the Dutch and Belgian contingents. Known for his defensive strategies and successful campaigns in the Peninsular War, Wellington was a cautious and meticulous planner. He aimed to hold his ground against the French attacks, hoping to buy time for the Prussian army to arrive and support his forces. His strategy was to absorb and repel the French assaults, using the terrain to his advantage, while minimizing his forces' exposure to artillery and cavalry charges. Remaining outside of battlefield, the Prussian army, led by Field Marshal Gebhard Leberecht von Blücher, counting around 50,000 infantry and several artillery, despite being defeated by Napoleon at the Battle of Ligny 2 days earlier, was determined to support Wellington, showing remarkable resilience and speed. The Prussians approached from the east, aiming to attack the French right flank and rear, thereby putting Napoleon's army between two fires. Blücher's primary objective was to unite with Wellington's forces and bring about a decisive engagement with the French. The Prussians' rapid march and aggressive engagement were pivotal in disrupting Napoleon's plans and forcing him to fight a battle on two fronts. The day began with both armies preparing for battle. The ground was wet from the heavy rains the night before, causing Napoleon to delay his initial attack in the hope that the sun would dry the mud, making it easier for his artillery and cavalry to maneuver. Around 11:30 a.m., Napoleon launched a diversionary attack against the chateau of Hougoumont on the Allied right flank. This fortified farmhouse became the scene of intense fighting throughout the day. The British and their allies tenaciously held the position, tying down significant French forces that Napoleon had intended as a feint. As the day wore on, the main body of the Prussian army, led by Blücher, arrived in force, increasing the pressure on Napoleon's right flank and rear. In the early evening, with the situation becoming increasingly desperate, Napoleon committed his elite Imperial Guard, the last reserve, in a final attempt to break Wellington's line. This move was a gamble, as the Guard was considered invincible, and their defeat would likely demoralize the rest of the French army. The Imperial Guard's assault initially achieved some success, but they were eventually repelled by a combination of stubborn resistance from Anglo-Allied troops and devastating flanking fire from advancing Prussian units. The sight of the Guard retreating sent shockwaves through the French ranks. The defeat of the Imperial Guard precipitated a general collapse of the French army. What began as an orderly retreat quickly turned into a rout, with soldiers fleeing the battlefield in disarray. The aftermath of the Battle of Waterloo had profound and lasting impacts on Europe and the wider world, marking the end of the Napoleonic Wars and ushering in a significant period of peace and political restructuring. The both sides' casualties estimated around 25,000 deaths each. French lost nearly all their artillery. Around 8,000 of them were captured by Allied forces and 15,000 deserted after the battle. After his defeat at Waterloo, Napoleon Bonaparte returned to Paris, where he abdicated for the second time on June 22, 1815. Facing pressure from both his enemies and former allies, he attempted to flee to the United States, but was thwarted by the British naval blockade. Eventually, Napoleon surrendered to the British and was exiled to St. Helena, a remote island in the South Atlantic, where he died in 1821. The defeat of Napoleon allowed the Allies to restore the Bourbon monarchy to France, with Louis XIII regaining the throne. This restoration attempted to stabilize France and Europe by reinstating the traditional monarchical order, though it did not fully quell the revolutionary ideals and movements that would continue to surface in the coming decades. The Congress of Vienna, which had been interrupted by Napoleon's return, concluded in 1815 after his defeat. It aimed to restore the European balance of power and prevent the rise of a single dominant power. The Congress redrew the map of Europe, resizing and reshaping states to create a balance that would prevent future widespread conflicts. This led to a relatively stable period known as the Concert of Europe, which lasted until the revolutions of 1848. The Napoleonic Wars and the subsequent defeat at Waterloo had lasting effects on European politics, society, and thought. The spread of Napoleonic legal codes, ideas of nationalism, and the concept of a citizen army influenced many European nations and colonies around the world. The Holy Alliance, formed by Russia, Austria, and Prussia, sought to suppress revolutionary movements and maintain the status quo. But the seeds of nationalism and liberalism continued to grow. The wars had drained European economies, leading to widespread financial strain and the need for economic restructuring and reform in many countries. The British emerged as the dominant economic power, with London becoming the center of international finance. The battle, and Napoleon himself, became subjects of fascination, inspiring a wealth of literature, art, and later film. The Romantic era's artists and writers often reflected on the themes of heroism, tragedy, and the tumultuous history of the early 19th century. The Battle of Waterloo effectively ended a quarter-century of warfare that had reshaped Europe. It marked the beginning of a new era characterized by attempts at international cooperation to prevent large-scale wars, a legacy that, despite challenges, laid the groundwork for modern Europe. As we close this chapter reflecting on the Battle of Waterloo, we've journeyed through the heart of a conflict that forever altered the course of history. From the strategic maneuvers on the battlefield to the personal tales of courage and despair, we've seen how a single day can shape the destiny of nations and the legacy of leaders. The Battle of Waterloo was more than a military engagement. It was the end of an era, marking the fall of one of history's most legendary figures and the beginning of a new chapter for Europe. Through the smoke of battle, we've glimpsed the resilience of the human spirit, the complexities of leadership, and the unpredictable nature of war. Thank you for joining us on this historical journey. Remember to subscribe to the channel, like, and comment on the video if you enjoyed it. It would help us continue preparing materials for you about important history events and building channel. Until next time, on a history chapter, keep the past alive by remembering the stories that have led us to where we are today. Farewell until we open the next chapter together.